Suppose my argument looked like this, started like this. Thomas Jefferson was either the fourth president or he was the fifth president. But Jefferson wasn't the fourth pres. Therefore, Jefferson was the fifth pres. Is this argument valid? Yeah, Mr. Jefferson's got it right. This argument is valid, but unsound. Because we've got a what? This is deductive, this is disjunctive syllogism, so it's a valid structure. But we've got a false premise here. Because we all know that James Madison was the fourth president and Monroe was the fifth president. We all know this. And if you don't know that, they probably didn't drill it into your heads like they drilled it into our heads in third grade. Oh yeah, they don't make people memorize that stuff anymore, do they? Just Google it. Yeah, in the world of Google. But anyway, pretty soon I think there will be memory chips or whatever where you can just... I guess that's an episode of Black Mirror, right? Yeah. Something like that. Anyway, I'll behave myself just a little bit. So does that make pretty good sense then? Yeah. I just did this one to kind of illustrate the distinction between validity, an argument being well structured, but it being unsound on the grounds that there's a false premise. Now, if our argument is, if you know that the argument is a deductive one, that is, that it is constructed in such a way that if the premises are true, the conclusion is supposed to follow by necessity. If either of these criteria fail to be met, you can say that the argument is unsound. In other words, it's got to be well constructed and the premises have got to be true.
So is unsound synonymous with being false then? Or would it just, because I don't know if it's like just illogical or just flat?
I'll give you the word you want. The word you want is fallacious. A fallacious argument is an argument that commits some kind of logical error. The logical error might be a problem of construction. The logical error might be a problem of truth or falsity of the premises. But a fallacious argument is one that commits some kind of error that makes the conclusion not follow from the premises. Was that answer okay?
Yeah.
Good, good. Now, I'm glad I'm giving that quiz on Monday because we need some more time because this nuts and bolts kind of part of the course is really important.
Wait, which quiz? The LCR one?
Oh no, there's no online quizzes required in this class. We're going to be taking Chapter 1 quiz on Monday.
Oh, I took a quiz on Monday.
Oh. None of that stuff is required. That's,
because
yeah.
I mean, it gave me a grade. It was bad. I cried. I didn't
Oh. Well, you'll notice, and I tell students, if it's an online quiz and there is an essay question on it, remember that scores a zero until someone goes in and manually grades it. Well, good time to get them wrong. Yeah, much better time to get them wrong than to get them wrong on Monday. Now, induction. How do inductive arguments differ from deductive arguments? Yeah, Cameron.
Doesn't inductive, they use like past experiences, like the owner's example. The lady tried to pygmy at her for her cold, and she tried twice and it worked, so she decided that the herb wasn't perfect.
Did you hear his comment? Typically when we argue by induction, what we do is we argue from observations to a plausible conclusion. When we reason inductively, we will typically be arguing from a set of facts to a plausible conclusion. Now there's a big difference between this and deduction. Notice if an argument is deductive and its premises are true, you can say, what about the conclusion? It will also be necessarily true. Not so with induction. Because with induction, we say that if the premises are, and I'm saying this a little bit differently than the textbook, just to be clear about it. If the premises are true and relevant to drawing a particular conclusion, if the premises are both true and relevant to drawing a particular conclusion, we can't say that they necessitate a conclusion, but we can say that we've made what is called a strong inductive argument. You may have noticed in the textbook that the author used the phrase inductive validity. I would rather you not use the word validity in that way. Because in fact, the validity relationship that we were talking about with deduction does not apply at all to induction. Because you can never get certainty from an inductive argument. You can either get strong plausibility or weak plausibility. And that's a major difference between inductive arguments and deductive arguments. If a deductive argument is valid and has true premises, the conclusion will follow by necessity. If an inductive argument has true and relevant premises, we say that the conclusion is a likely conclusion. You make inductive arguments every single day without even thinking about it. Like, for example, when I got up this morning, I didn't think about putting on shorts and a t-shirt to take the dog out for a walk. Why? Because it's the middle of January, and I should say my past experience tells me not to expect a 65 degree at 3:30 in the morning in the middle of January. Not that it doesn't ever what? Not that it doesn't ever happen. But prudence tells me, if I were a betting person, my past experience tells me that if someone says, we're going to have a 90-degree day in central Pennsylvania this January, I would whip out my wallet and bet every single penny in my wallet that it won't happen. Now, of course, I could be wrong, but my past experience tells me the odds of that happening are astronomically low. But you can't be this. But you can't have certainty. Now, to piggyback off of Cameron's earlier description of an inductive argument, we do draw inductive arguments every day. And by the way, even the argument for induction is inductive. We infer that past experience is a good predictor of what? Of future experiences. Well, why? Because it's worked for us, generally speaking, in the past. We can generally draw reasonable conclusions from our past experience, provided that we are careful observers, provided that we do enough observing, and also provided that our observations are not outliers. In other words, atypical cases. But yeah, arguments by induction appeal to past experience. Now, because I don't have time to go over all of the homework, I want to go over 2 of the homework problems that you probably found to be the most challenging. But also, I think my answers might be the most enlightening. Well, informative. Enlightening was the wrong word. Yeah, this isn't the philosophy class where you're likely to get that kind of enlightenment. Oh, good, I got a couple of grins. That was the hope. All right. I'm just going to spark this up and hopefully it will show up in a second. I want to talk about the echinacea example. Let me read it to you, and then hopefully this will spark up in a second. Now, these were exercises 1-3, 1, and 2 that I asked you to look at. You were asked to read the argumentative passage. Hint, they were both arguments. You were asked to determine if you thought that they were essentially inductive or deductive, and then to give some kind of an account of why you thought so. If you fumbled or had challenges doing this one, no wonder, because you were kind of thrown right into this before you had this little talk today. You were asked to give it a shot cold, as it were. I'll give you my answers, and by the way, my answers are probably more subtle than the author of the textbooks would have been. I guess I'm bragging. Which is probably not a good trait. Okay, good. Exercise, can you guys see that okay? Let me see if this thing will zoom in. Yeah. That first passage is, a friend of mine told me that the herb echinacea would cure my cold or at least reduce the symptoms if I took it 4 times a day. So I did what he said, but I didn't get any better any faster. A few months later, I caught another cold and took echinacea again. This time at the first time I was sick, but no luck. Next time I'll just take some aspirin. Echinacea doesn't work. Now the argument looks something like, or I should say, you might frame it something like this. If echinacea is effective, then it will help me to get over my cold more quickly. But it didn't help me to get over my cold more quickly. Therefore, echinacea must not be effective. So I actually would write it this, I actually did write it this way. If echinacea is effective, then it will help me get better faster. But it didn't help me get better faster, therefore it must be ineffective. Now Mr. Cameron is not wrong about this, because his testing of the second premise for truth or falsity was tested how? Yeah. Yeah. He tested the second premise via experience inductively. But this is admittedly subtle. This is admittedly subtle. But the fact is, the underlying argument that he was basing his testing method on was actually modus tollens. So I would actually say it was a deductive argument with inductive premise testing.
Yeah, I was talking.
Yeah. And this is why this thing is, things are sometimes a little more subtle than they at first appear. And just to give you a little bit of background that you don't have to know for the test, this is really the model that some philosophers of science call this. The philosopher of science, Karl Popper, you don't have to know his name for the test, but he's considered one of the 100 most important minds of the 20th century, just to drop that out there. But this is a method that is sometimes called either a critical test or a crucial test of a hypothesis. This right here was a hypothesis related to echinacea. We tested the hypothesis via experience, and because we didn't get this effect right here, we could draw the conclusion, therefore not E. And by the way, I would call this a successful scientific test. Because a successful scientific test doesn't mean getting the results you want. It means getting information. Enough information so you can determine whether or not a hypothesis is a reasonable one, or you can rule it out. To be able to rule out a hypothesis is actually a good thing. It means you learned something. Now, of course, we could ask this larger question. Were all the variables tested out? You know, was this the only variable and so forth? Was there even a cold, you could ask? Because indeed, some other things look like cold symptoms. But anyway, I don't want to belabor that point too much. But that's my answer. It's a deductive structure with an inductively tested premise. Now this second one, just designed to be a little bit fun, I think. Let me read it to you. This one is deductive. And I'll show you why in a minute. Actually, I think I showed you why there. It says, if I buy these potato chips, I know I'm going to eat the whole bag full at one sitting. But if I eat the whole bag full at one sitting, you'll notice that's what that stands in for. I'll upset my stomach. Well, then if I buy this tempting item, my guts are going to get upset again. Satan, get thee behind me. Which really means something like, I better not give in to the temptation. So if I buy these potato chips, then I'm going to eat the whole bag full. And if I eat the whole bag full, then I'm going to get an upset stomach. But I don't want to get an upset stomach. Therefore, what's my conclusion? Therefore, I better not buy that bag of potato chips. I like this a whole lot better than I like that. You may not like that a whole lot better, but I do. Because when you get rid of the words, you can actually see the underlying structure. This one is a deductive argument. We had two conditionals, and then the person said, but not you. Now we have 1 minute. It is deductive. This is a question I did not ask. Is it valid? Yes, it's valid. Why can this necessarily be drawn by these three premises? If you don't know why now, no big deal. But in about 2 weeks, you should be able to figure it out without much difficulty. Admittedly, I will never hold you to this high of a standard, probably, on a quiz or test. But if we were to do a course that mostly did formal logic, you would have to do these wonderful things called proofs. These wonderful things like proofs might be giving you people anxiety already hearing the word. Because when you think of proofs, you might think of what other classes? Geometry, calculus, these classes that might give some of you bad flashbacks. I will admit, I didn't actually appreciate formal proofs until I took a logic class. I did not appreciate them until I took a logic class. In other words, the things I didn't appreciate at age 14, I was able to appreciate at age 19. And they can actually be fun. But when you do a formal proof in deduction, what you do is you merely demonstrate what other things you can derive from what is known. And you have to show why you're allowed to make that move. So what I would do here is, see, if B then U, but not U, I can derive not B by the rule modus tollens applied to premises 2 and 3. Guess what I can do next? I can derive the conclusion by then applying modus tollens using premise 1 and derive premise 4. That is a very simple version of a deductive formal proof. And it's actually kind of what? They're actually incredibly easy once you what?
Practice it?
Yeah, once you practice it, once you get the hang of it. It's like learning a language, if you will. I mean, I'm terrible at learning languages. But yeah, you have to sometimes do what if you're not getting it? Yeah, practice. You got to drill. That kind of thing. We will pick up with more of this next time. We'll talk about that last part of the chapter. Have a stellar Wednesday.